What are you announcing today?
Well, in celebrating 25 years of incredible progress at the Gates Foundation, I'm committing that my money and the money in the foundation will all be spent over the next 20 years to the causes that we work on. Global health being the biggest, education being the second biggest, and basically things that we treat lives as having equal value. And I'm super excited that that'll be over 200 billion that we'll give away during that time period, and that we'll be able to save tens of millions of lives.
And you're not going to miss it.
No, I won't. I hope I'm still alive when we finish the 20 years, but I'll save a little bit to be able to buy hamburgers as much as I need.
Has any organization in the history of humanity ever given anywhere near $300 billion away?
No, this will be for a foundation, a large amount of resource, definitely more than ever before.
You could say so. Why are you doing it now?
Well, I think it's important to double down on the great success we've had. I didn't know when we got started how much progress we'd make. I saw the tragedy of over 10 million children dying every year. I saw that the vaccines that could save those lives were being given to rich kids who were not at risk and not to the kids in other countries. And so we've been able to make sure that vaccines that stop you dying of diarrhea or pneumonia and other diseases are now getting out to almost all of those kids. And that's why we've gone from 10 million children dying every year to under 5 million children dying every year. And we can do more.
But why double down now? I know you say you're optimistic about the future, but one could look at this change in your approach and think, is he worried? Is he panicked?
Well, whenever you create a foundation, you can decide that it should last forever, but then saying, okay, who's in charge, and will it stay true to the things I want it to focus on? By deciding to spend all this money in the next 20 years, we can get a lot more done. And after that, there'll be other very wealthy people who can understand what the problems are, what's still left over. So we're giving a lot of certainty and doubling down because of the success. In a way, it's wild that somebody can have as much money as I do.
It is wild.
So I'm lucky to say, okay, let's make sure those who are the poorest are the most in need, kind of an equity, value-driven approach that I got from my parents, that's I'll be able to watch over, making sure that money is very well spent.
So I guess what I was driving at is there's no particular worry or fear or concern of yours right now that's leading to this decision.
Well, I'm sad that 5 million children die every year. I'm sad that some of the causes, like helping to buy vaccines for children, now it looks like we'll be able to raise less money now than we did in the past, because the U.S. At least is tentatively not supporting buying those vaccines, and other countries in Europe that have always been substantially more generous are also cutting back as they have budget tightness. I will say, despite the challenges we have right now, which are huge and surprising, I'm very optimistic about the progress we can make over the next 20 years. The next 5, there will be setbacks because of these cutbacks, but we'll get, and so the number 5 million might go up for a bit, which shouldn't happen. It's terrible, but over time, we'll get that number down even below 3 million.
But I heard something in the middle of that answer, which it sounds like in part you're doing this because you're looking at the world and you're looking at this country and they're doing less. So the Gates Foundation and other foundations need to do more.
Well, you always want more money going into these things where you're saving lives for a few $1,000s. I mean, if people could actually visit and go to a malaria ward and see those children, they would buy bed nets. If you saw a hospital like one in a part of Mozambique called Gaza, the money that stopped mothers from giving HIV to babies was cut off because of some confusion there. And, that's just an incredible tragedy. So I'd be doing this even if others were being generous. I want to make sure the money is spent as soon as possible. I view these things as urgent. In parallel with that, I'll always be an advocate that governments should, we never ask for more than 1% to go to helping the poorest. I think, cutting, when you're well below that 1%, cutting that, I think is, doesn't reflect the values I think we should stand for.
So you think America doesn't currently reflect the values it should be standing for?
No, I think the U.S. Shouldn't be cutting the money for vaccines or HIV medicines. And I'll be an advocate that, what was done now over 20 years ago when President Bush created a lot of these programs for HIV, malaria, and some other things, that should be maintained.
What's it been like working with the Trump administration? I know you recently had dinner with the president. Did anything come out of that?
Yeah, so I talked to him about work on HIV and the great innovations, and encouraged him the same way he had helped the COVID vaccine get done quickly. I said, hey, let's work together to get what's called an HIV cure done sooner. I talked about polio. We're close, that if we stay committed, we could get that done in the next 4 or 5 years. So, it was a great discussion. Since then, some of the programs have been cut off, and I'm hoping both with the president or the Congress to get them to restore some of those aid activities.
If they don't, is the Gates Foundation large enough to take the place of what the government had been doing?
No. The government money here is over 4 times, even now at this high level where we're spending down over the 20 years. The U.S. government's very big, bigger than one individual. So their money for global health was 4 times what the Gates Foundation
So if this
gives.
money goes away, and you were talking about millions of lives saved, can you put a number on the lives potentially lost?
Yeah, absolutely. So we should be going from 5 million children dying a year over the next 5 years to 4 million. And now with these cuts, if they're not reversed, we'll go to over 6 million dying. So instead of going down, we'll go back up.
Wow. So it's a difference of 2 million lives.
Absolutely. These vaccines, the HIV medicines, preventing mothers from infecting their babies, the impact of this money has been miraculous. And the good news of going from the 10 million to 5 million, it's too bad people don't realize that in the U.S., their government's generosity, in Europe, their government's generosity, partnering with us and others, has been why we've had a greater reduction in childhood death than ever in history of the world, was this magic time period.
So why don't you think more people know this and are not right now calling their congressperson, writing letters to the White House and saying, please, help?
Well, over time, I think they will. I mean, we have partners like Rotary who help with polio eradication. I don't think they'll stand still while that money and those people have been let go. We want to not let polio spread back to where it's paralyzing hundreds of thousands of children a year, and that's, hangs in the balance. So a lot of it is that you don't see it. If you go visit, then you can't turn away from it. You will be drawn into the helping these children. And as you make these children healthier, then they can be educated, they can uplift their economies. The recipients like Indonesia and Vietnam, who got a lot of this global health money, have graduated, and they fund it entirely with their own resources. And so we get to focus in on the countries that are in the most need and help them lift themselves up.
I want to ask about focus, where to put one's attention, because people hearing you talk right now, it's not that they want millions of children overseas to die of preventable illnesses. No one's rooting for that. But at the same time, they're thinking, the money that we have to give, the money that Bill Gates has to give, why not spend it here in America where we have plenty of problems of our own?
So the plea here would be to say that for 1% of the budget, we're not touching the 99%. For 1%, if you can save lives for 1,000 times less than we save lives here, and if that creates stability in those countries, so they're thriving countries that'll participate in the global economy, and we don't have to intervene with our military or anything, and the strategic relationship with them where they see that we've helped them advance, and that money is why you'll be able to see a future pandemic early and stop it from spreading like COVID did all the way to the United States. So there's a lot of benefits that come from what is quite, in the scope of the U.S. government, a very modest amount of money.
And yet here we are with reports out there that the Trump administration may, by executive order, make it illegal for charities like yours to send money overseas and still get a tax benefit. If that were to come to pass, well, just first off, what's your reaction to that possibility?
Yeah, I hope they don't do that. I think that, if you are successful and you care about children dying, you should be able to give, all of these programs, buying vaccines, buying HIV medicine so that mothers don't infect children, buying bed nets. These are things that the U.S. government was giving more than I am to these things. Now that is up for question. But I'd be surprised if they actually said the freedom to help those children is taken away.
Okay. You are turning 70 this year. Microsoft is turning 50. The foundation is turning 25. A lot going on. What are you doing to celebrate?
I'm stunned that, I'm 70, because when I was young, I thought, hey, those old people don't, they're not very up to date on, what's changing, what's important. And, so here I am. Obviously now, rather than, write code myself or do it hands-on, I'm supporting great young people, scientists who are coming up with new vaccines. Like we're funding a TB vaccine and an HIV vaccine, and we're coming up with new seeds that allow farmers to be more productive, even if the weather's getting more difficult for them. So it's equally fun to be supporting, very young, innovative people and heroes who are out in the field delivering these innovations.
But the question was about celebration.
Oh, okay. I still like to work hard, but when my birthday comes in late October, I'll, gather hundreds of my friends, and maybe they'll roast me, or we'll just, stay up late. No, it's incredible that I'm very lucky to have these resources. I love doing the work. I get to travel and see the impact. And I'm not working in my 20s. All I did was work. Those Microsoft days were very intense. Now I'm, more normal. I do take time off. I play tennis. I play pickleball. I get to read, and so I'm not all work.
But while you are retirement age and you take a little more time for fun, you're definitely not retired.
No, I work full time. I go to Africa and India and, go to the labs where these scientists are doing the work. I like to really understand, okay, what's going well, what's not going well.
What was it like in the note accompanying this announcement today? You write that you're beginning the last chapter of your career. Just typing those words, last chapter. What's that feel like?
Well, I wish I had, even more time, and, I hope I'm lucky enough that during the 20 years that we spend all of these resources, that I'll be able to both help guide it somewhat and, see the work and make sure that others, are going to step in to pick up whatever doesn't get done during these next 20 years. No, I don't feel like a 70-year-old. That always kind of is like, wow, how did that happen? but I have to say, okay, this is the last part of my life, and I'm a steward of these resources. I should make sure that it's well spent. Warren Buffett's generosity, that's always, I've felt a huge responsibility to make sure his generosity is highly impactful, and now this is the last stage of all that.
I once sat down with Dolly Parton in an interview like this, and I asked her, what does she hope the world says about her 100 years from now? And she said, I hope they say, doesn't she look good for her age? But it does raise the question, Bill. What do you hope the world says about you 100 years from now?
Well, I have no interest, in that. If I cared about that, maybe I'd make the foundation a foundation that lasts forever. And other people choose to do that. That's fine. I don't think that's the way to have the most impact. Most of the things I work on will no longer be problems. TB should be eradicated, measles should be eradicated, malaria. And so, people might be puzzled. What were these things? Just like smallpox has been eradicated, nobody has to worry about that now.
What an amazing thing to say. The problems that you're working on now and taking on in the next 20 years, you think 100 years from now will feel like distant memories.
Yeah, I think we'll treat all children's lives as having value because the world will be rich enough and the innovative tools to let you do that will be so strong. The childhood death number, should be very small and not different between different countries.
There's another big milestone in the year ahead, just about a year, the 250th anniversary of the birth of America, the Declaration of Independence. You're born here. You built your company here. As Barack Obama used to say, only in America is your story even possible. Do you think America, 250 years in, or better question, do you think the world is better off today because of America and its people than it otherwise would be?
Well, certainly. The fact that both people born here and people who come here are working on the latest medical understanding and willing to share that knowledge, including some funding for it, the U.S. has been fantastic. The PEPFAR program that goes back to President Bush, that was so generous, literally saved millions of lives. The U.S. has a lot to be proud of. It's a model for research. It's a model for the amount of philanthropic giving people do, where they can pick, a huge range of causes from art to cancer to education.
Yeah.
And do great work. No, this country's made gigantic contributions.
And yet, and I've covered this when I talk to young people, poll after poll shows that most young people don't believe, or at least don't have a positive view of capitalism. And many of them don't have a positive view of America. What are they missing?
I think you must be misreading those numbers somewhat.
I'm definitely not misleading the
Okay.
capitalism number. Only 40% of people under the age of 29, young people, have a positive view of capitalism, according to Gallup.
Well, I wonder what their thinking is the alternative to that. I mean, certainly, we've seen where you have East Germany versus Western Germany, you have North Korea versus South Korea, you have societies that are culturally identical at the start, and one runs a more capitalistic system than the other. You see the outcomes in terms of education, life expectancy, freedom. Now, capitalism covers such a range of things. Should taxes on rich people be higher? That's within capitalism.
Sure.
Should companies be held to a higher standard? That's within it. But this is the system that organizes human activity that led to, people now live over twice as long as they did 100 years ago. People are largely literate, whereas if you go back 100 years ago, the majority were not. So this system, it's very imperfect, but the arc of time is that it's worked very well.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you ask a young person, what do you think of capitalism, they're thinking, how's their life going? And how do they think their future is going to go? And it does seem that from your generation to a younger generation, even younger than me, a lot of pessimism has snuck in.
And that's very complicated because, what are they comparing to? They wouldn't want to have been born 50 years ago. Honestly, if they think so, that's one of those factual difficulty problems. We are far, far better off today.
But this is fascinating because 50 years ago they would have said, I could have a high school degree, still have a job where I can save a little money, take a vacation, own a car, own a home, retire with dignity, and hope my children are better off, and expect that my children will be better off than me. People today don't even want to have kids in larger numbers than we've seen before.
The U.S. birth rate is down somewhat. All rich countries, over time, you actually have some reduction there. This is the best time to be alive. If you get cancer today, it's better than 50 years ago. If you're a woman, if you're a gay person, if you want to learn a variety of things, yes, there are problems. We need to solve Alzheimer's. We need to get rid of polio. But now we have the tools that it's within our reach to make those advances.
Let's go back to the three big goals for the future of the Gates Foundation. One being eliminating childhood deaths, infant deaths, and deaths of mothers in childbirth. The elimination of infectious disease. Before I get to the third, which is about prosperity, and I think is a longer conversation, what are you most excited about technologically that's going to help you accomplish those goals?
Well, malaria is this terrible disease that was in America but got eradicated. We have tools now that give us a chance to completely get rid of that. Malnutrition is a terrible thing. Most kids in Africa don't ever develop their brain or their body because their diet isn't quite right. And that's just a huge tragedy. HIV, we have 40 million people in the world living with HIV. And they don't live their full lifespan, even if they're taking their medicine. And so we need a tool that actually does a real HIV cure. In every one of those areas, the Gates Foundation is funding brilliant scientists. We have trials underway. And so even in this 20 years, I'd expect to have advanced each of those problems.
On that third area, putting people on a path to prosperity, education is a big part of it. You're right about that. AI is a part of education. I've asked the heads of some of the major AI companies the following question, and I'll ask you. What do you think a 7-year-old, a first grader, needs to know today to be ready for the world that AI is creating?
Well, in a certain sense, it's going to be so novel that none of us are ready for it. But some of the aspects of it are incredibly positive. I mean, we're already creating these AI tutors. So I went to New Jersey to see how a form of AI called Khan Amigo from Khan Academy was being used by the math teachers there. And it was great to see the kid who was way behind, it was helping him. The kid who was way ahead, it was helping him. The promise in areas like health and education of AI improving the world is phenomenal. Kids will choose what they're interested in. They don't all have to be AI scientists. That we only need a small portion to go and do that. But for any young person now, AI can foster their curiosity, help them learn new things. So it's a very empowering tool.
It is an empowering tool, but what I'm driving at is if AI can do most everything the human brain can do in the near future, what do we need to prepare the human brain for? What do we get up in the morning and contribute to the world if AI can do everything?
Well, that's called the embarrassment of riches problem, that, you won't have to work the long hours that you work today. You won't have a shortage of doctors and huge waiting lists. If a kid in the inner city feels like, God, math's not for me, I'm confused, they'll be able to seek encouragement and get things that motivate them to learn those things. And so it's true that if you solve so many of society's problems, society will get to decide how do you spend time. And how quickly that comes, you'd get pretty broad disagreement, but in general, that's where we're headed. And so that, we'll have more freedom. It's a lot better than things going backwards, where we don't, particularly if you look at a place like Africa, millions die because there's not enough doctors. And we'll use AI to provide medical advice that will eliminate that tragedy.
So what do you teach a first grader to be ready for the world ahead?
I don't think you would change what you're doing today. If they encourage them in the subjects they like. Over the next few years, the AI tutors will come in and help teachers, help them engage their students and motivate their students. But it's not like there's some new curriculum that we need to adopt.
All right, that's interesting. You mentioned Alzheimer's. Your father died with Alzheimer's. My grandfather died with a rarer, similar disorder called supranuclear palsy. And every day I think about it. I'm sure you think about it too. Where are we with understanding the brain and how to prevent illnesses like this?
Well, there's a lot of resources being put into Alzheimer's research. I've funded some things.
Can I ask you before you get into that, do you worry? Because I worry with my grandfather. Do you worry about the path your father went down and whether these next 20 years you could follow?
Well, certainly, once you get to your 80s and 90s, your risk of all kinds of diseases is very high, and we'll all, eventually succumb to these things. I'm not putting my money into my longevity or the medical risks that I have.
Yeah.
Most of my money goes for, deaths that are very cheap to avoid. I did pick Alzheimer's because I met some of the researchers there. And we now have a blood test where you can see what your amyloid levels are. There's a lot of work going on with drugs. People like Eli Lilly have trials out that maybe if you're accumulating amyloid, you can use an antibody drug to get rid of that and prevent or reduce the chance of getting Alzheimer's. So I'd say this field over the next 10 years will be very different. That's why I fund some of that work. I stay up to date on it. We're gathering data about all the people who have Alzheimer's so scientists can try out different ideas.
They all want me to ask you about measles. I find measles to be something hard to keep covering because the knowledge is available if people want to utilize it. Get a vaccine, your risk goes way down. People don't seem to want to utilize it, and you and I having a conversation about it or scolding somebody or telling them what they need to do, a conversation about it doesn't seem to help. In fact, on some level it seems to hurt. People are offended to be told what to do.
Well, the number of measles deaths in the U.S. won't be large. It'll be a lot larger than it should be because of the skepticism from people in positions of leadership about the vaccine. It'll cause more deaths outside the United States because whenever, and there, it's over 300,000 deaths a year. And so, that to me is deeply unfortunate. I've seen children who have measles who are dying of measles. It's horrific. The U.S. is lucky that we don't have much of that. We had a thing in Samoa where they stopped using the vaccine, and pretty quickly they had a lot of deaths from measles because of that. So, it's a medical miracle, and I wish we were using any influence to encourage people to vaccinate.
But it seems like the more you push vaccines, the more some people are resistant to the push. That's the trap that I struggle to get out of. I don't know how anyone does.
Well, we're working to take vaccines and instead of having a needle, it's just a little patch you put on your arm. We don't know, that might help improve the uptake. We're combining a lot of the vaccines together so that there's not as many shots involved. We've shown that the HPV vaccine, in a lot of countries, they've taken our data and they see you only have to get it once to be fully protected. So that's saving a lot of money and helping us cover a lot more girls to prevent cervical cancer. So, You know, the vaccine story, we will have a TB vaccine, we'll have an HIV vaccine. Those are super important tools for the future of our health.
You mentioned Andrew Carnegie in the beginning of your essay, your note today. And Andrew Carnegie said in his memoirs that he doesn't believe in a personal God that cares about the affairs of man, but he does believe in a God. Is that where you are on the subject?
Yeah, I don't think I have definitive knowledge in this area.
But you seem excited about what you might learn in the next 20 years about this subject.
But I think the basic idea of the golden rule that, you know, we should help other humans, you know, that pervades all religions. And, you know, my parents inculcated that in me, and, you know, so that guides the work I do.
But you said you're more or less an atheist.
I don't have a particular knowledge of, you know, what rituals God wants us to engage in, but my values are very similar to people who are deeply religious.
Interesting. Maybe God will hold a press conference one of these days.
Help us out.
Yeah.